Hi, this is Caroline Stephen. Rarely does an interview touch my soul the way this one today does. Patrick Hollingworth is a mountaineer who's climbed mountain ranges all around planet Earth, including in 2010. He stood on the rooftop of the world. We featured Patrick 5 years ago on Talking Trading, and his interview remains one of my favourite interviews to this date. The haunting beauty and majesty of Mount Everest never left me. Today, Patrick talks about the top 5 mountain ranges around the world which have made him as a person. We start in New Zealand and then go to Pakistan. And we finish up in Nepal, where for part 2 of today's interview, once again, we go from base camp to summit ridge and summit to watch the sunrise from the highest place of planet Earth. In part 3, Patrick talks about what mountaineering does for him as a person and why he climbs, and how in the mountains there is no room for pretense or ego, because if you have them, they mean death, and how that affects his psychology and his resilience in everyday life. I love this interview with Patrick. It is really special to me. I hope you enjoy it. Today on Talking Trading, we are speaking to the very special and wonderful mountaineer, Patrick Hollingworth, who we had on Talking Trading 5 years ago. And his interview remains one of my favourite interviews to this day. Patrick Hollingworth, hello and welcome back to Talking Trading.
Hi, Caroline. Thank you. Great to be back here. I can't believe it's 5 years. Feels like it was only yesterday.
It does feel like it's yesterday, and your voice actually resonates in my head many times. You know, I think our interview is my favorite interview on Talking Trading. I think about it often. It left me with such a haunting sense of beauty and inspiration about Mount Everest. I have never spoken to anyone who has summited Mount Everest, and I was fascinated. And I could ask you exactly the same questions about it today and be just as interested, but I won't. There's other things I want to talk about with you. But if we could maybe touch the rooftop of the world later in the interview, that would be really good. And maybe those crevasses, that would be great.
Okay, yeah, okay.
So, Mr. Mountaineer, I know you're 6'4", you're a built-born mountaineer. You have actually traversed many international summits and you've traveled the world by mountaineering. Let's take a look at your top 5 favorite places in the world that you say have made you. Let's start with where your love for the mountains began, New Zealand.
Yeah, I love New Zealand. I think it's my favorite place on earth. I love the mountains there. They're really, really wild. They're probably some of the most wild mountains on earth. And yeah, that's basically kind of where I learned the ropes, so to speak, to begin with, just in terms of hiking or tramping, as they call it in New Zealand, having a backpack on and simply walking up valleys and into the next valley. And then subsequently, more technical mountaineering and learning how to move through rocky and icy terrain. And New Zealand, not many people realize this, but New Zealand has, although the mountains themselves aren't particularly high, like Mount Cook is the highest mountain. It's only 3,700 meters. It's really significant because they basically start at sea level. And so from the bottom of the mountains to the top is actually a similar kind of elevation to the mountains in the Himalayas. It's just that in the Himalayas, the mountains start at 5,000 meters.
Oh.
So New Zealand mountains are really big and bad and dangerous, and they get really extreme maritime weather from the ocean. But I absolutely love especially the South Island. The mountains there are just really stunning. New Zealand.
Pakistan. I know nothing about Pakistan. I've never seen Pakistan other than from Navy SEALs on television. Yeah. One of your favorite places in the world. Why?
Yeah, I climbed a mountain, or attempted to climb a mountain in Pakistan in 2004. And I just find it a fascinating country. So the mountains themselves are quite impressive. So in Pakistan, the main mountain range is known as the Karakoram, and the Karakoram is essentially the westernmost extent of the Himalayan range. Oh. And it's got the Karakoram has 5 8,000 meter peaks there. So there's only 14 8,000 meter peaks in the world, and 5 of them are in Pakistan. And so the mountains there are very, very high, and they're really densely kind of located. So from that sort of, I guess, that that physical beauty. It's just a stunning environment. But also probably, or some of the most hospitable people I've ever come across are in Pakistan. In really, really welcoming, and always really curious to find out about what life's like in Australia. There's also that shared connection through cricket. You'll see most kids, or many kids in Pakistan, the clothes they wear are the one-day colours of their favourite cricket team. And so you'll see green and gold in lots of little villages around Pakistan, because they like the Australian cricket team amongst other teams. So yeah, really, really welcoming environment. And
At one
certainly up in the
stage,
mountains.
you were climbing there, and Osama bin Laden was supposedly in the area.
Yeah, well, so we were there in 2004, and this was, so it was only a couple of years after 9/11, and there was still the sort of the active hunt for Osama bin Laden, and it had been rumored that the CIA had basically chased Osama bin Laden up the valley that we were walking up to get to the base camp of the mountain we're going to climb. So supposedly that had only happened a few months before we got there. And interestingly, actually, we passed, on our way there, we passed through Abbottabad, which is where bin Laden was eventually, his hideout was. So that was interesting, having passed through that town. But I mean, I always sort of felt like, Pakistan gets a pretty bad rap, in a number of Western countries. But in my experience was certainly, I found it to be a really welcoming country. Yeah.
Italy. Now, when I think of Italy, one of my favorite countries in the world, I think of Positano, Ravello, Capri.
Yes.
But you think of something quite different.
So there's probably, without a doubt, one of my favorite mountain valleys in the world is if you head up north of Aosta into Val d'Aosta, and it's basically a valley which takes you up to just the foot of Mont Blanc, or Monte Bianco, and then on the other side of the mountains is France. But so you get this valley which basically kind of gets you to the foot of Mont Blanc, and then these sort of two sub valleys, Val de Ferret, and I forget the name of the other valley, but these really quaint mountain valleys with small Italian villages. There's cows with their cowbells kind of walking through the pasture and so on, and it's just an incredibly peaceful kind of environment. And whereas the mountains in New Zealand are really quite wild and uninhabited, the European Alps are gorgeous because they have all these villages in the valleys, and they've been there a long time. And it's you can generally eat pretty well when you're in those valleys. They know how to do life very well, and I think there's one of the most relaxing things you can do in your lifetime is simply bask in the sun in a European mountain valley.
Wow.
The climbing's pretty good there as well. Yeah, totally. Yeah.
Technical climbing or just tramping?
Oh, both. I mean, there's one of the classic sort of walks of the world is called the Tour de Mont Blanc, or I think it abbreviated to MTB, but that's about a 14-day walk which takes you around the whole kind of Mont Blanc massif. And you pass from France into Italy, into Switzerland, and then back into France. And, you're not using tents, you're just staying in little refuges along the way in different villages. And so you eat really well and beautiful wine. And so some really, really good walking and hiking, but also, some, around Mont Blanc itself, some incredible technical climbing. And, the Chamonix on the French side of Mont Blanc is essentially kind of the birthplace of mountaineering itself. Yeah.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Now, this place, the only technical climbing you might be doing is up St. Paul's Cathedral, but London is one of your favorite cities in the world. It's not a mountaineer place, but just very quickly, why do you love London so much?
I haven't been to London I probably was last in London in 2015 or 2016. I think most people enjoy being in a large global city where it's 24 hours a day. There's always something happening, and you feel you're kind of part of the global community. Whereas sometimes in Australia, you can feel a little bit isolated but of course it's all contextual, right? In the context of the past 18 months, I don't think I would have wanted to be in London. You know, and
Okay.
in fact, a few of my friends who do live in London, I mean, they've spent, most of the past year in kind of in semi lockdown. So
Yeah.
so
State of
London, I
depression.
don't know if it'd be in my top 5 places currently.
Okay, Nepal. Now, you've been a mountaineer for a long time. You started in New Zealand, but once you climbed and summited Everest, suddenly you became a mountaineer that everyone was interested in, and you could
Mm,
charge money for your keynote speaking. So let's go to Nepal. May 2010, you stood on the rooftop of the world, Everest, which stands almost 9 vertical kilometers into the Earth's atmosphere. I get tears when I say
mm,
that, just imagining
mm.
it. In our interview on Talking Trading, you took us through base camp, 2, 3, 4, Summit Ridge, Summit, and
Yeah.
down. Can we go back there?
Yeah, I haven't thought about Everest in quite a while, actually. So happy to go back there.
Fantastic. Can we start at base camp and then move to the ice fall?
Yeah, it's a pretty amazing experience being in base camp. I mean, if you're there during the climbing season, which is April and May, it's a really big community. I think you've probably got up to 1,000 people essentially living there. And it's a real global community. You've got climbers from all around the world. You've got a huge number of Sherpas working sort of based out of base camp. So there's always lots of activity, and it's a pretty awesome kind of place to meet different people. I mean, it's also been a bit of a tragic place, particularly in recent years. You had the icefall collapse in 2014, and then you had the huge avalanche in 2015, which kind of took out base camp. I think it killed about 20 people. So yeah, it's certainly experienced its fair share of trauma over the past few years. But yeah, it's a wonderful place to be. You're surrounded by these huge mountains, and whenever you're there, if you're a climber, it's your kind of your respite, your home away from home, whilst you're kind of resting in between sorties up onto the mountain.
You're in a tent,
But
or
once,
is
yeah, in a tent, and what each base camp normally has, you have your own individual sort of sleeping tent, and then you'll have communal quarters in a much bigger tent, and you'll have a cook tent, and so it really is a bit of, you've got your own little community within a broader kind of community. So yeah, it does become your home away from home, because you do spend quite a bit of time there, and also it enables you to kind of decompress from some of the stresses of being
yeah?
up on the mountain. And certainly because base camp is at the foot of the icefall, so you can always, literally the first thing you see in the morning when you get out of your tent is this huge kind of collapsing glacier coming down towards you, and you can see people climbing through it, and you know that you'll be needing to go back there again, and it's always pretty stressful moving through the icefall. It's a really dangerous environment. It tends to fall over all the time, like big blocks of ice as big as houses will have shifted from one day to the next. So you need to move pretty quickly through there. So it's definitely a pretty sort of stressful place to be, and you're definitely running the gauntlet a bit when you're in the icefall.
That's a
And
place where you tie 3 ladders together and you cross crevasses that are effectively bottomless.
yeah, that's right. You get these really big crevasses, which they're black, so you can't see the bottom of them. And so you're trying to kind of get over those, and but yeah, the biggest risk in there is not so much falling into a crevasse, but rather having part of the whole structure itself collapse. And so that's what happened in 2014, when I think it was 16 Sherpas were killed, and a good friend of mine, Ankaji Sherpa, was killed in that incident as well. So
I'm sorry to hear that. I wondered when I
yeah,
heard the
well,
years.
yeah, my son Harry, his middle name is Ankaji, so
Oh,
named after, but Ankaji was he was one of the best Sherpa climbers, and just an absolute legend as well. So yeah, he's missed.
mm.
So then
So
above the icefall, we head up to Camp 1 and Camp 2 and Camp 3 and then Camp 4.
hang on.
But it's okay.
Camp 2. Camp 2, what's Camp 2 like? How
So
cold are we
well,
talking?
well, both Camp 1 and Camp 2 are in this feature known as the Western Coombe. So Coombe is a Welsh word for valley, and it's like a long valley that's probably, I don't know how many kilometers long it would be, but it's on snow, it's on a glacier, and you've got these really steep walls of Everest, and Lhotse, which is the fifth highest mountain on Earth, and then Nuptse, which is a 7,900 high meter mountain. So you're surrounded by these huge kind of icy cliffs. But interestingly, during the daytime, it actually gets really, really hot because the sun kind of bears down on it, and then the heat can get trapped in the valley. So most people don't realize, but you get incredibly sunburnt whilst mountaineering. The snow and the ice, it just reflects a lot of that, the UV rays right back at you. So that's quite strange. But climbing from Camp 1 to Camp 2, it's not even climbing, it's basically walking because it's not very steep. From Camp 2, that's when you start encountering some of the steeper climbing, and that takes you up what's known as the Lhotse face. And so Lhotse is Everest's next door neighbor, and it also happens to be the fifth highest peak on Earth. And so you kind of climb halfway up Lhotse, and that's where you put your third camp. And so that's where you've got really steep ice. You've got, maybe it's some sections are 45 to 50 degrees, so pretty steep. And so the tents, you basically the platforms for the tents are kind of cut out of the snow and the ice. And then, so Camp 3 is halfway up the Lhotse face. And then to get up to Camp 4, you kind of climb the second half of the Lhotse face. And that then puts you up on a saddle between Lhotse on one side and Everest, the summit, on the other side. And that's where you launch your...
Which is the camp where a lot of people have fallen to their deaths going to the toilet during the night?
That's Camp 3, where if you're not roped in, it's pretty easy to to slip over and fall. So that's a pretty extreme place to put a tent. Yeah.
All right. So Camp 4, you're in the valley, ready for the summit climb. What time do you start the summit climb?
It's really interesting because these days, I think as technology is getting better, teams are generally climbing much faster than they used to. So back in the day, teams used to sort of be leaving at 10 o'clock in the evening and not summiting until 10 o'clock in the morning. I think my recollection is we left pretty early as well. We left at about 9 or 10 o'clock in the evening. Yeah. And so you climb through the night. And so Camp 4 is at 8,000 meters. And then, to put that in context, there's about a quarter the amount of oxygen at 8,000 meters that there is at sea level, due to the atmospheric pressure is less, so less oxygen molecules to breathe in. So you're moving pretty slowly. And we got to this feature known as the balcony, which is at about 8,500 meters just on sunrise. And it then took another 5 hours of climbing up the southeast ridge, over the south summit, up the Hillary Step, and then onto the main summit, because we summited it at about 10 o'clock in the morning from memory. So it was a long time, 12 hours. And as I said, these days, 12 hours is quite slow going. The climbing itself is really enjoyable. The most enjoyable and kind of challenging climbing on Everest is on the summit day, because you're climbing along this ridge, the summit ridge, and you have a 3,000 meter drop down into Tibet on your right hand side, and on your left hand side it's about a 2,500 meter drop down into base camp. And at some moves you're literally looking straight down beneath your feet, and you can see 2.5 kilometers down that way. And I remember you get what's known as a cornice, a fracture line, which is from overhanging snow on one side of the summit ridge, and you get little fracture lines which suggest it's about to fall off. And I mistakenly put my foot into a fracture line, and I remember through this slot in the snow, I was looking down and I could see cloud beneath my foot, and that was 3,000 meters down. So it's pretty wild. It's effectively the most remote part of the Earth possible, or at least one of the more remote parts on Earth. And to be walking along this climbing along this really narrow kind of undulating ridge. And I remember at the time thinking, this is probably what a cricketer feels, like a test cricketer feels when they walk onto Lords for the first time. So many kind of famous cricketers have gone before them, and I was really overwhelmed. I remember thinking, I can't believe I'm sort of literally walking in the footsteps of Tenzing Norgay and Ed Hillary and so many. It was pretty surreal. Yeah, it was pretty surreal to be up there. Yeah.
So you watched the sunrise. How was that feeling?
Yeah, it was stunning. It was stunning. Because as the sun was rising, I remember two things in particular. One was because you're up so high, you can see the sun rising well before the sun is actually rising lower down. And I remember looking down into this valley into Tibet, and it would have been about 4 vertical kilometers down where I saw a light of a car. I think it was a car. I forget whether it was a hut or something, but there was a light on. I remember thinking, isn't that fascinating? I can see somebody 4 kilometers down in Tibet, and they're probably just getting up for their day's work, whether they're a yak herder or whatever, but thinking they probably don't realize that there's somebody looking down on them from near the summit of Everest. So that was pretty amazing. And the other thing I remember looking south down over India, and because it's late May, the monsoon is starting to kind of build, and you could literally look down on these monsoon storm clouds, and you could see lightning flashing. And I don't know if you've ever been on a plane and seen a storm from above, but it's pretty surreal. And you get just these sort of yellow and orange pulses of light across the clouds. And we were literally kind of looking down on that. And that was a surreal moment. And that was probably the most, sublime moment of my life, I think. Yeah.
Wow.
And I know it sounds cliche to say this, but I've said this a number of times, but at that point in time, I never felt more kind of connected to this notion of like humanity globally, almost like, seeing somebody down there from such a long way and feeling like I could almost kind of reach out and touch them. It really overwhelmed me. I just remember thinking, the whole notion of we're all kind of on one small planet, and it's an amazingly beautiful planet. And and then I can go into cliches about, the need to look after our planet, which I completely agree with. But at that point in time, I do remember feeling so privileged to be up there, because that's not a view. It's probably a view that I think, I don't know, a few thousand people have had at most. And I can I could get a little bit of insight into what it must like to be an astronaut, to see the Earth, because although it was not that perspective, it was definitely a pretty unique perspective that just gave you a sense of the kind of the grandeur of the of the planet. And it was pretty awesome. Yeah.
Can you see the curvature of the Earth up there?
Yeah, you can. Yeah. I mean, you tend to notice it more so when you take a photograph and you look at the photograph and you can see it really clearly. But I mean, you definitely have a sense of being higher than anywhere else. And it definitely is a sense of it's a wild place to be. It's like human beings shouldn't be up there, and I mean, you can't survive up there. You're living on borrowed time when you're up there. And as much as you'd love to kick back and kind of enjoy the view and stuff, for them, you can't really do that. It's, it's bitterly cold. It might be minus 20 degrees, and you've got to get back down the mountain. It's effectively one of the most, if not the most, exposed places you could be on Earth. So it's not a place to kind of linger for too long.
You got to get down quickly. Is there a pressure to get down? Do you feel this impending sense of doom if you don't?
Yeah, absolutely. And I mean, given that this for me was now 11 years ago, it was, the events of 96 were still relatively fresh in people's mind, which was where, I think 13 people were killed. Yep, absolutely. And, a number of people, it was well known that people die on the descent. People give everything to get to the summit, but of course, it's equally difficult getting back down to Camp 4. And if you get weather that springs up really quickly, I mean, you can't affect a helicopter rescue up there. Basically above 8,000 meters, you can't rescue somebody. So it definitely feels, very, very exposed. But what I find really interesting is, that was 11 years ago, and increasingly there's been even more and more commercial expeditions on the mountain. And these days you're getting, I think, even, more novice climbers up there. And I suspect that the death rate has actually gone down. But having said that, I suspect that's because there's probably more people climbing Everest each year. But
death rate's gone down, but more people are climbing. You mean death rate's gone up because more people are climbing?
Oh, no, I'm actually saying, no, I'm saying that compared to the actual, the likelihood of you dying on descent from the summit of Everest has probably decreased because more people have actually been climbing Everest, and there haven't been any disastrous storms over the past few years, but that'll happen again, no doubt. It's really interesting. I mean, when I was there, so I was there in 2010. I had the first model of the GoPro head cam. Like they'd only released them a few months earlier, and so I was like, oh, cool, I'll get one of these. And so, one of the reasons why I was able to build a really successful speaking career in the first few years post Everest was I had all this footage that nobody else ever had. Because I had access to this little head camera. Whereas these days, everybody's wearing GoPros. And of course, back then, I think Instagram might have existed, but it wasn't widely used. Whereas these days, you're now getting people who are Instagramming on the mountain, and which is pretty wild. But I also think it's kind of attracting a bit of a different crowd. I think it's definitely attracting a crowd of non-mountaineers who are kind of using the mountain to maybe help build their profile a bit. And I'm sure they love mountaineering as well. Like, if you didn't love mountaineering, it would be nearly impossible to climb Everest. But these days, I think there's a lot of people kind of who are leveraging it, a little more for their own careers and all that kind of stuff.
Pat, why do you do it? Why do you traverse such hostile conditions when everyone else is sipping tea in front of the television or tucked up in bed? Why? What gives you the joy?
Yeah, I mean, I really miss it because I don't do it as much now, right? And I mean, back then, I was in my 20s and 30s, and to be honest, I found life really boring. And don't get me wrong, I love sitting back and sipping a cup of tea. But it was this kind of notion of wanting to live a life less ordinary, I guess. And I felt that by putting myself into those extreme environments, that was the best way that I could, really totally milk life, just get the marrow out of it, kind of thing. Kind of the old adage, I didn't want to be on my deathbed without any cool stories to tell. But you know what? It's really challenging, right? Because, you live a life like that, and you're going off every year to places like Pakistan, and you're meeting people from all over the world, and it's not a rock star lifestyle, but it's pretty unusual, and but it can be really hard kind of coming back into your kind of normal life, and then once you let go of all of that, and effectively, I mean, I let go of big mountain, of Himalayan mountaineering. Sort of my last expedition was probably 2013. And so I still climb, but, far less riskier environments in New Zealand. But so it's really hard to kind of let go of that, because, they were just these amazing years when life just felt so kind of rich with possibility.
Yeah.
And then, of course, other things come along, and you decide to start a family, and
things change. I get it.
Yeah, buy a house and build a business and all that kind of stuff. And then all of a sudden, you're like, well, I can't kind of do that. But it's really interesting. One of the things that put a bit of a cap on me was I couldn't get life insurance covering mountaineering.
There's no special Everest base camp insurance.
Yeah, no. So I started kind of thinking, well, wow, okay, maybe I need to and look, certainly having lost a few friends in the mountains kind of caused me to kind of reconsider that.
Something you said last time was the sheer natural beauty of planet Earth.
Yeah. And you have to really get out there to kind of, to appreciate that. So for example, a couple of weeks ago, I was back in WA with some friends. We were doing a surf trip on a boat, And, you know, we're out in the really remote part of the northwest of the state, and, you know, at nighttime, just these incredible stars. And I realized I haven't seen stars like that for, I don't know how long. You know, where I live just south of Sydney, you don't really see stars, you know, because of light pollution and all that kind of stuff. So, but what it made me, it kind of reminded me of, I mean, on the one hand, it's increasingly easy for anybody on Earth to kind of access the natural world, you know, virtually through the internet, and, you know, increasingly through, like, you know, augmented reality and all that kind of stuff. But nothing beats actually getting out there yourself. And I think that, yeah, as you know, it's a bit of a trap, kind of the modern life we live, because it does insulate you a little bit from all the risks from those kind of environments. But then I'd also say that the benefits are there as well. So, yeah.
So let's just apply this to your psychology. You've said that in the mountains, you're your best self. Like, you're actually a lazy person. You're just not lazy in the mountains, which I thought was very funny. What do the mountains do for you? How do they make you?
Yeah, so the mountains do a couple of things, I reckon. So, firstly, they totally kind of strip you back. There's no, you can't carry any false pretense in the mountains, because that will just be exposed, like, straight away. You know, I think everybody's working around with various kind of, you know, cloaks over them, or kind of, you know, projecting idealized, you know, or, yeah, sort of images of the self. But in the mountains, like, that's all bullshit. Like, that doesn't cut it. And so you kind of get stripped back a little bit. But that's really, you need to kind of, you know, if you're really trying to grow as an individual, and, you know, you need to get stripped back, and you need to kind of see what are your strengths and what are your weaknesses, and what you are and are not capable of. And, yeah, because you can't hide from any of that. And so I used to really like that element of the mountains, and I still do to this day. But also I feel like, yeah, because a lot of society is sort of built on all these constructs, which, again, they don't really apply in the natural world. And you can kind of, I just think you can learn how to sort of act otherwise in the mountains. You know, does that make sense?
Yeah, I'm getting a sense of it.
And I think that, I mean, I'm not a religious person per se. I mean, I'm a spiritual person, but I don't adhere to any particular religious doctrine or anything like that. But I've always thought, like, you know, I mean, I understand how people get that sense of awe when they walk into, you know, like a big cathedral. And so for me, I have that same experience when I enter the mountains, and there are these staggeringly large mountains around you, and you realize how small you are. You know, the time, you know, these mountains have been here for so much longer than you have, and you begin to, I find it really useful way to kind of put things in perspective, and appreciate even, like, our own lives, you know, whether they're 50 or 70 or 100 years long. The temporal scale of our lives is minute compared to the temporal scale of, like, the natural world around us. And I mean, I think that our society could learn a lot more in terms of just being a little bit more humble, in terms of the incredibly short period of time that we've been on the planet. And I guess, you know, maybe not to be too arrogant about ourselves as a species, and maybe just to appreciate that the Earth gives us a lot, and therefore I think it's probably that we need to look after the Earth. And that's a whole nother challenge around climate change and all those kinds of things.
So climbing is a spiritual experience for you? Because I can imagine it would be a spiritual experience for me.
Yeah, and it is and it isn't, in terms of, like, when it's just really hard and scary, and you're terrified and you're physically exhausted. You know,
It's not spiritual.
it's not spiritual. It just really sucks. But, you know, you do have these kind of, just these minor moments of these sort of sublime moments, and that's when it kind of becomes sort of spiritual. But I mean, yeah, to be clear, I'm not climbing, and spending every minute of that climb sort of in spiritual wonderment. For the most part, I'm just going, this is really freaking hard work. And why didn't I just decide to go on that beach holiday instead? But of course, the beach holiday doesn't actually give you those real moments of kind of the
Elevation.
sublime.
Sublime.
Exactly. Yeah.
So has it built your resilience as a person in business?
It definitely did for a while there. I remember kind of coming back from not just Everest, but as I increasingly kind of was climbing bigger mountains. And I remember what it enabled me to do was you shed the exterior cloak so at least some people, and it's certainly in business and work, all that kind of stuff, the facade of invincibility kind of thing. And certainly with
ego.
men, and alpha males kind of trying to, I'm better than you and strutting around, and you just go, that's all bullshit. And once you've actually done something, you know what you're capable of, that sort of is within you, and you don't need to have any external facade. You shed whatever, I never really had a cloak anyway, but it's kind of, that's way, way stronger and more powerful. And so, I certainly developed a lot of resilience. And then it's interesting, in the past sort of few years, and some of the work I was doing was really, really difficult. And at times I probably lost a lot of that resilience. I do think that it would probably suit me pretty well to go back to the Himalayas and just be reminded again of that.
Yes,
You know what
I understand.
mean?
Are you glad you summited Everest? Was it good for your self-esteem?
Yeah, it was. I'm definitely glad, and certainly I feel more than anything just really privileged to have been up there. And I climbed the mountain with, four. There were five of us, so four really dear Sherpa friends, and
Sherpas.
one of them to this day is still a really close friend. And so that was a real sort of privilege, as I said. So it wasn't so much about pride, and building up my own self-esteem, but rather, I guess I felt quite humble to have almost been allowed to be up there.
Oh, what a beautiful answer, Pat.
Yeah, because I think that, I was always really cautious about the you don't want to be the dick who's walking around going, I climbed Everest, because I'm just kind of calling bullshit on that person. You know what I mean? If you're mountaineering if the reason you're doing something like that is for extrinsic reward, for recognition and all, I just that's just weird to me, So for me, again, it was always it was just about curiosity. Could I do it? I was never a gifted. I was never the alpha male. I was never like the sport jock or anything like that. But again, that's why, I used to, I enjoy the notion of kind of the real strength comes from really within, and knowing what you are and aren't capable of, and then testing yourself, as opposed to trying to prove to other people what you are. Yeah. I know what I stand for.
You know who you are.
I know what I'm capable of, and even in recent times, in some of the work I've been doing, that's sort of been challenged, and it doesn't matter, because I know what I stand for. That's what's important to me. So yeah.
So I remember I asked you this question last interview, and you kind of went, "Oh, that's a really nice question." Pearls of wisdom. Can you give any last pearls of wisdom from the highest peaks around planet Earth? You did that. That's what you did last time.
Yeah, no, I'm just, I don't remember how I answered last time, but I'm just trying to think, well, what would my pearls of wisdom be today? There would be a couple. Okay, so one of them is definitely going to be around, in fact, if it was anything, it was basically don't be afraid to kind of break the mold and step outside the herd. So for example, in my, starting my mountaineering career when all of my other friends were building their professional careers and getting married and buying houses, and everybody's telling you to do that, and then to not do that and do the absolute opposite. You're kind of going against the direction of the herd. And increasingly, I think, and I'm not saying, be a rebel for the sake of being a rebel, but I think increasingly it's kind of easy just to sort of follow the expectations of the herd. And I'm all for kind of don't be afraid to, it's the notion of having skin in the game. Get some skin in the game. And once having skin in the game means you're invested and you're committed to doing what you're doing. And don't be afraid of having skin in the game when everybody else is telling you, that's the wrong game to be in.
Yep.
The chances are they're just following the kind of this bigger societal narrative, which is, you should do this and you shouldn't do that. But in actual fact, it's like, for me, like I said, a life less ordinary. I didn't want to be some kind of robot or automaton just doing what everybody tells me to do. So I guess I've always sort of had that fierce independent streak. And, although I really believe in the importance of, the collective and community and doing what's best for society, sometimes doing what's best for society or your community or your collective means actually stepping outside of that and doing things a bit differently. Yep. So I'm not sure if that constitutes a pearl of wisdom, but there you go.
It does. So last images of Everest: sun rising, curvature of the earth, nice ridge, 3 kilometre drop side to side, Tibetan farmer turning his light on for the day. Anything else to add?
I remember I've got one photo from the summit of my friend Lakpa, and you can see the curvature of the earth in the background. And by this point, we'd been on the summit for about half an hour, and by this point in time, the weather had really started deteriorating, and it was starting to kind of snow, and the wind was picking up. And I just remember thinking, this is so wild. And within about 10 minutes, we were caught in a whiteout, so we couldn't see anywhere as we were descending down this narrow ridge. But it was interesting. That's kind of one of the fleeting kind of last memories I have of being on the summit. Again, just thinking this is so wild, but wow, what a privilege to be up here. And interestingly, I think I've always thought I'd be back there again. I always thought, no, I'll be coming back here. And, I don't know if that's the case now anymore. I would have to get, much fitter than what I currently am. And, leaving the family behind for 2 months would be really a hard thing to kind of comprehend. And I don't even know if I'd be able to go through that again. But it was interesting. And this again sounds cliched, and I might have even said this last time, but I felt like I left a little bit of myself up there.
Oh wow, no, you didn't say that.
Yeah,
part of your soul.
And absolutely. It's a very special place. But I guess it's a special place to a lot of people for many different reasons.
Oh, Pat, where can people contact you if they want to talk to you or reach out?
Sure. There's probably 2 ways to find me. You could find me on the web at patrickhollingworth.com. Or alternatively, you could find me through my business, which is think.garden. My business is essentially I call it a complexity lab and design studio. Basically, I do a lot of work in the space of complex systems and how organizations can kind of reconfigure from, rigid, structured, kind of mechanistic entities to more fluid, dynamic, kind of adaptable systems. Either at patrickhollingworth.com or think.garden. They're my 2 kind of haunts on the web.
Pat, it was really special to touch the rooftop of the world again with you. Thank you so much for coming back on.
Oh, you're welcome. Likewise, but it's a pleasure to be back. And see you in 5 years' time?
See you in 5 years' time. Maybe you will summon it again.
There you go.